If there's one thing that chapter 131 of Chainsaw Man has taught me, is that Fujimoto does not give a damn what your theories are, where you think the story's going, who's a good guy, who's a bad guy, none of it matters. Because no matter what you think, Fujimoto is just going to subvert your expectations and just completely throws out everything you thought was true in the story right out the window. This chapter makes it very unclear whether or not Fami is a good guy or a bad guy, or good gal, you know what I mean. And sticking with the topic of the Famine Devil, it's heavily implied that she is just as powerful, if not more powerful, than a freaking primal fear. All this in a chapter where you would think a ton of dialogue would give us some answers in furthering the plot of the story. And while we did get some more details furthering the plot of the story, I for one left this chapter with a lot more questions than I did answers. If you remember from the previous chapter, Denji and Asa were riding on the Chainsaw Man mobile, heading straight into the stomach of this worm monster, or worm devil, whatever. It honestly doesn't matter anymore, because originally I had all these theories about how this worm devil was gonna metamorphosize into some kind of like kaiju Mothra looking devil, and that this might be the transformation or metamorphosis devil or the change devil, which nicely parallels the character arc that Asa's currently going under, where at first she didn't have a strong reason to live, but eventually she ends up finding a reason to keep pushing on. And I thought maybe, oh, you know, this devil is kind of representing that growth from Asa. Well, no, he doesn't matter at all, because as soon as he swallows Denji and Asa, he immediately pukes them up for a reason that I'll explain in a second, but this infuriates the falling devil to the point that it just automatically obliterates this worm devil. And that's not even close to the biggest shock from this chapter, because immediately after doing this, the falling devil apologizes to somebody off panel, saying that they're sorry they couldn't feed Asa to the diner. And it turns out to be none other than the famine devil, who is also revealed to have been controlling the falling devil this entire time, as she commands it to return, and it turns into this tiny little voodoo doll version of itself. So this simple sequence in itself raises a ton of questions. Like, does this mean that the four horsemen can technically be more powerful than a primal fear, depending on which primal fear and which horseman? Because if you asked most Chainsaw Man fans prior to this chapter, most of them would tell you that universally primal fears are more powerful than horsemen. We saw Makima fight the Darkness Devil for a brief moment, but it definitely seemed like the Darkness Devil would have gotten the upper hand had Makima not left Hell. But here in this chapter, it seems like the Famine Devil had absolutely no problems controlling and summoning the Falling Devil in order to do her bidding. This also raises the question, was the Falling Devil at full power at this point? Because for the most part, a lot of people were kind of discussing the fact that the Falling Devil seems much more underwhelming in terms of general power than the Darkness Devil in part 1. And some people kind of chalk that up to the Falling Devil being on Earth and not in Hell, so maybe there's a possibility that she was nerfed on Earth and only had access to a small portion of her abilities. That would have made sense. But regardless, we don't get too much time to fester in that and really think about it, because immediately after this, we see that it's actually Nayuta that was the one that made the worm monster puke Denji and Asa up by controlling its brain a little bit and tricking it into thinking that all humans taste like literal crap. Like, it completely controlled its taste buds and made him puke them out. But the most interesting part of this chapter isn't any of those things, because what really gets me excited, and what I'm sure got most other Chainsaw Man readers excited, is the conversation between Nayuta and Fami, where Nayuta asks why she's doing this, and Fami actually reveals that she's trying to prevent the prophecy of Nostradamus instead of causing it. Now, I know that might seem a little confusing, because just when all of this Falling Devil stuff was beginning and Fami and Yoshida were having their conversation at this diner, it very much seemed like Fami was the one kickstarting the Falling Devil coming, which in turn was kind of making the prophecy come true. So the only way I can really explain this is that maybe the Falling Devil was gonna come anyways, whether Fami was the one to control it or not. And Fami managed to control it before this happened and used it in order to kind of trap Asa, and by extension Yoru the War Devil, and starve them. Because we also learn in this conversation that anyone that is starved can become a pawn of Fami, much like how the condition for the Control Devil is having someone that you deem is inferior to you being the only condition for you to control them. How Fami managed to get the Falling Devil to starve and control it is a completely different conversation. But what's more surprising than the fact that Fami is the one that's actually trying to prevent Nostradamus' prophecy from coming true is her reasoning behind it. Because at first she explains that as soon as the prophecy comes true, the age of human will end, bringing forth the age of devils, literally causing hell on earth. And Nayuta Nayuta for some reason is kind of down for this idea. We also got to remember that she's a devil still and also acts pretty childlike because she is a kid. So combining those two things, she doesn't really understand or really care about the gravity of what Fami just said. But Fami kind of rebukes it by saying, well, if that happens, then there won't be Chinese food or pizza anymore. And that's what makes Nayuta do a full 180 and be like, no, I don't want that to happen. Screw Nostradamus' prophecy. And at this point, while I was reading this chapter, I was like, is this really happening? Is this really their motivations? And literally with any other manga, it would leave me questioning where the plot is going. But seeing as how this is Fujimoto we're talking about, it very much falls in line with the types of motivations that his characters would have. I mean, just look at Denji. He recently revealed that his big character arc from part 1 led to his new grand motivation of wanting to just get intimate with a woman. So it would make sense that this ultra powerful horseman really only wants to keep enjoying human food, and that's her main reason for keeping humans alive. What's also very interesting here is that although we assumed what Fami was trying to do was kill Yoru or something by feeding her to this worm devil, what she really was trying to do is starve Yoru in order to make her one of her pawns, because in her own words, she thinks that the war devil has the potential to prevent the prophecy of Nostradamus. And if we're assuming that the prophecy of Nostradamus is what brings forth the death devil, Fami's pretty much saying that the war devil is capable of going toe to toe with the death devil himself or herself. Well, Nayuta of course foils this plan, and Fami asks Nayuta if she wants to join forces with her in order to prevent the prophecy of Nostradamus from happening, and Nayuta just straight up says no. Well, Fami asks why, and her answer is honestly what makes me truly love Fujimoto's writing and general storytelling, because she says, because I have school, kind of saying it like it's a drag or something, and then we cut to her raising her hand with a bunch of other kids in class. So just immediately ending that whole like mini arc that we just had super abruptly and with way more questions than we did answers. But among those questions, one of the important ones to me is, how did Fami control the falling devil, and does this mean that the primal fears aren't necessarily at the top of the food chain when it comes to devils? Because like I said earlier, we originally thought that it's primal devils at the top, then horsemen, and then all other devils under that. Well, that might not be the case anymore. And another implication of Fami potentially being on the good side, or at least on the side of the humans, is who the hell is the fake Chainsaw Man tied to then? Because the running theory to that point was that this Chainsaw Man was a product of Fami, kind of one of her minions in trying to fulfill her goals. Well, if we remember a few chapters earlier, the fake Chainsaw Man actually saved Denji and Asa from the falling devil, who we now know was being controlled by Fami. So now we're back to the theories like, okay, is this the Justice Devil or somebody that made a contract with the Justice Devil that chose to take the form of Chainsaw Man because it was their own concept of justice? Because as we've seen with Yuko and the class president at the very beginning of part 2, the Justice Devil doesn't necessarily have one form when it makes a contract with a human. It very much depends on the user. So now there's this third party out there that seemingly has Chainsaw Man's best interests aside from Fami and aside from Yoru. And it's going to be very interesting to see how all these different interests and motivations collide eventually. I don't know. All I know is that this chapter kind of proved to me that I'm just kind of done with the whole theory stuff, for the most part at least, and I'm just going to enjoy the ride that is Chainsaw Man Part 2.